When Judge Robert Thompson called Sarah Johnson to his courtroom that morning, he was convinced he'd found the perfect target to set an example, a modest English teacher who dared to publicly criticize him. His goal was to derail her career and mend his wounded ego by shaming her in front of everyone. But as Sarah stood poised in her navy cardigan, clutching her notes firmly, Thompson had no idea he was walking right into a snare he'd crafted himself. Sarah Johnson tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she wrote themes in contemporary novels on the whiteboard. Her senior students watched, some engrossed, others sneaking peeks at the clock, itching for lunch break. Celebrating her 10th year at Lincoln High, Sarah tackled typical classroom challenges but treasured every second of shaping young minds. "Ms. Johnson," Ethan called from the back row, "why fuss over themes? Can't we just read the book for fun?" Sarah grinned warmly and set the marker aside. "Great question, Ethan, and it cuts to the core of our work here. Novels aren't just for kicks, they reflect truths, fairness, and what it means to be human. Diving deeper lets you see not only the story but the world with sharper clarity." When the bell rang, students gathered their belongings. Sarah's gaze landed on the school paper left on a desk, its headline screaming, "Judge's decision cuts school budget for private deal." Her brow creased, remembering last month's town hall where she'd fearlessly called out Judge Robert Thompson for funneling education funds into a private project. Later in the staff lounge, Emily, a fellow teacher, gave Sarah a teasing poke. "Heard you went full activist mode at that town meeting." Sarah laughed, brushing it off. "I just spoke the truth. Thompson's move might be lawful, but it's tough to defend ethically when it shortchanges our schools." "You ruffled some big feathers," Emily warned. "Thompson's got powerful buddies all over town." "I'm just an English teacher voicing my opinion," Sarah replied, stacking her papers. "What's he gonna do? Haul me into court for it?" Few at Lincoln High knew Sarah held a law degree, earned with distinction, before she discovered her true calling in education. She'd clerked in courtrooms but found legal fights weren't her path, opting instead to spark critical thinking in students through literature. Driving home that evening, Sarah's mind wandered to her grandfather, a small-town attorney who fought for the little guy. He taught her that the law should protect the vulnerable, not flaunt power. His worn law books, now gathering dust on her apartment shelves, quietly honored the road she'd stepped away from. At her snug one-bedroom apartment, Sarah kicked off her shoes, ready to tackle grading. Her answering machine blinked with a message. "Ms. Johnson, this is the city court clerk. You're summoned to appear regarding a traffic violation from last month, under Judge Thompson. Please show up Friday at 9 a.m. Sarah's brow furrowed. A traffic violation? She'd paid a minor ticket for a rolling stop weeks ago online. There shouldn't be a court date. A flicker of unease hit her, recalling Thompson's cold glare at the town hall when she spoke up. "That's weird," she muttered, pulling out her laptop to double-check the payment. Little did she know this was the first step in Judge Thompson's carefully laid plan. Judge Robert Thompson's chambers exuded authority, with lofty oak shelves lined with leather-bound legal tomes, gold-framed awards, and a desk meant to intimidate anyone seated opposite. Adjusting his tie, he flipped through Sarah Johnson's file, a sly grin creeping across his rigid face. "James," he called to his clerk, "dig up everything you can on this teacher, Sarah Johnson." James, looking uneasy, nodded. He'd witnessed Thompson single out targets before and recognized the pattern. "The summons for the traffic violation went out as you ordered, Your Honor." "Perfect." Thompson leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "She thinks she can question my authority and smear my name in public. I've handled hardened crooks with more respect." The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a town meeting, sir. Free speech, right?" Thompson's eyes narrowed. "It's not her speech, James, it's how she tore apart my ruling, citing legal cases and picking at procedural gaps. She made me look like a fool in front of the town board." He slammed the file shut. "Who does the schoolteacher think she's up against?" What really stung Thompson wasn't just Sarah's critique but how precisely she delivered it. Most townsfolk ranted emotionally at meetings, easy to dismiss. Sarah, however, was calm, citing case law and procedural errors with surgical accuracy, almost as if. "Scour her history, education, past jobs, anything significant," he ordered. That afternoon, James returned with a thin folder. "Not much to report, sir. She's been teaching at Lincoln for 10 years, lives alone, pays taxes on time. Clean record." He hesitated, then added she graduated law school 15 years ago, top of her class, but never took the bar exam. Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "A law school grad?" He pondered this, then smirked. "Interesting. She knows enough to stir trouble but not enough to stand her ground in my court. He glanced at the storm clouds outside. James, update the summons. Change it from the paid traffic ticket to failure to appear for a hearing. Add a contempt charge. James blanched. But sir, that's practically fabricating. The system gives judges discretion for a reason, James, Thompson cut in sharply. This will be a light slap on the wrist for our teacher, a fine or some community hours, just enough to teach her to stay in her place and maybe leave a blot on her record about respecting the judiciary. James paused, then nodded reluctantly. Thompson's reach spanned the courts and town. Few dared challenge him even when his methods skirted ethics. Most defendants paid his fines rather than fight a stacked deck. That evening, at a dinner with town bigwigs, including the school's superintendent, Thompson casually voiced concerns about teachers meddling in politics and weakening local institutions. Take this Sarah Johnson matter, he said, swirling his wine. Her actions aren't exactly a stellar example for students, are they? The superintendent, mindful of Thompson's grip on school funding, nodded. I'll handle it promptly. Thompson flashed a charming smile. I'm sure it's no big deal, but teachers should focus on teaching, not judging the courts. Don't you agree? The trap was set. When Sarah Johnson entered his courtroom, she'd face not only fabricated charges but also pressure on her career. Judge Thompson was dead set on making her regret ever crossing him. As the Lincoln High staff meeting wrapped up, Principal Carter asked Sarah to stay behind, his expression unusually somber as colleagues filed out. Sarah, I got a concerning call from the superintendent yesterday, he said, removing his glasses and pinching his nose. Rumor is you're caught up in some legal trouble. Sarah's confusion was genuine. Legal trouble? You mean the traffic ticket? I paid that online ages ago. That's not what I was told, Carter replied, sliding a document across his desk. The superintendent mentioned a summons for dodging a court date and contempt of court. Judge Thompson himself flagged concerns about teachers who, in his words, undermine judicial respect. Sarah's eyes skimmed the paper, her mind racing. This is absurd. I paid the fine immediately. I have the receipt to back it up. I hope you're correct, Carter said, his tone caught between obligation and unease. The superintendent hinted this could escalate to a contract review if it worsens. A cold realization hit Sarah as the dots connected. This is about my town hall remarks, isn't it? Carter's silence said it all. That afternoon, Sarah found a formal court notice in her mailbox, starkly different from the routine ticket she'd dealt with earlier. It cited charges of failing to attend a required hearing and contempt for ignoring a judicial summons, demanding her appearance before Judge Robert Thompson in 3 days. Her hands trembling slightly, Sarah called the court clerk's office. I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, but our records show you were summoned last Friday for your traffic violation, the clerk said, sounding frustrated. Your no-show led Judge Thompson to issue the contempt charge. But I was never told about any court date, Sarah insisted. I paid the fine online, here's the confirmation code. The system confirms your payment, but it was flagged for a court appearance due to hang on processing errors, the clerk replied. You'll need to address it with the judge directly. That night, Sarah pulled a dusty box from her closet, packed with her grandfather's legal notes and case files. She booted up her laptop and dug into Judge Robert Thompson's career. Articles painted a picture of a judge whose rulings often favored certain developers and tycoons, with the same names recurring in his cases. Notably, in his 6 years on the bench, no complaint against him had ever progressed beyond the initial stage. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Emily from school. Sarah, something strange is happening. Carter was quizzing everyone about how you teach, asking if you talk politics with the kids. What's going on? Sarah's teeth gritted. Looks like Judge Thompson doesn't appreciate being called out. After hanging up, Sarah noticed her hands were calm now. The early wave of anxiety had sharpened into a clear, determined focus she hadn't tapped since her law school days. Thompson had misjudged, targeting the wrong teacher to intimidate. Okay. Game on, she murmured, flipping open her grandfather's tattered copy of Judicial Conduct and Ethics. Sarah sprawled on her living room rug, surrounded by stacks of printouts, law texts, and her glowing laptop. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun as she marked patterns in Thompson's rulings. It's not just me, she whispered, connecting the dots. Thompson had a history of twisting minor infractions to settle personal grudges. 3 years ago, a reporter who slammed him faced sudden IRS audits. Last year, an attorney who challenged his decision got slapped with groundless bar complaints. The pattern was sly. Most folks paid fines or backed off rather than fight. but it was clear as day. Her phone pinged with a text from Emily. Asterisk Carter's observing your class tomorrow. Calls it a curriculum review. Asterisk the heat was turning up. Sarah paced her apartment, legal strategies swirling and dissolving in her mind. Confronting Thompson directly might uphold her values but could jeopardize her career. Giving in would let his power grab slide. Her eyes caught a framed photo of her grandfather on the shelf. What would you do? She asked, his warm, crinkled smile. Leafing through her grandfather's old journal, packed with case notes from decades past, a faded news clipping fell out. Her grandfather with townsfolk who'd ousted a crooked official. You don't topple power with louder power, she recalled him saying. You do it with preparation and truth. That night, Sarah made 3 crucial calls. First, to a law school buddy now with the state bar. Second, to a former student turned reporter. Third, to the courthouse stating she'd defend herself at the hearing. The next morning, Sarah taught with razor-sharp focus, even with Principal Carter jotting notes from the back during her lesson on standing up to injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird. Afterward, he approached her desk. Sarah, about this court mess, maybe just say sorry to Judge Thompson, he offered. Things like this can spiral fast. Sarah flashed a steady smile. Thanks for the tip, but I think showing kids what principle looks like means holding your ground, even when it's hard. As Carter left, Sarah slipped a small digital recorder into her bag and reviewed her notes again. Thompson thought he was trapping an unprepared teacher who'd overreached. He was about to face someone with a keener legal mind than he'd expected and nothing to lose. The next 2 days were a blur of prep. Sarah took a personal day from school, claiming she needed to consult a lawyer, which was partly true since she was her own counsel. At the county law library, she pored over judicial conduct cases and procedural rules. Mrs. Clara, the aging librarian, noticed her drive. Haven't seen someone hit the books this hard in ages, she said, helping Sarah locate a text on contempt proceedings. Most folks just Google these days. Sarah chuckled. My grandfather swore by actual books for legal work, not search engines. Clara peered at her curiously. You're not a lawyer, are you? I know most of the locals. Just a teacher with some legal know-how, Sarah replied, and a situation that calls for precision. At the courthouse records office, Sarah requested transcripts of Thompson's past contempt cases. The clerk raised an eyebrow at her detailed order. This is specific for someone going pro se, she remarked, handing over the pile. Sarah nodded. I like to be ready. Back home, Sarah mapped out a timeline, the original ticket, her payment receipt, the notifications she never received, and the town hall where she challenged Thompson. The connection was subtle but telling. Her phone rang. It was Liam Chin, her former student now at the local paper. Ms. Johnson, I checked what you asked. Thompson's contempt charges have jumped 400% since he took the bench, mostly hitting folks who've publicly criticized him. Nothing big enough to raise red flags, but it's a clear trend. Can you send me names of others he's targeted? Sarah asked. Already compiled a list, it's in your inbox, Liam said. But, Ms. Johnson, be careful. Thompson's cozy with the county exec and half the school board. Post-call, Sarah refined her courtroom plan. Directly accusing Thompson of misconduct would likely get dismissed without solid evidence. Instead, she'd focus on the procedural holes in her case, only nudging at his wider pattern if the moment felt right. That night, Sarah chose her court outfit carefully. A simple navy cardigan with black slacks, professional but understated. She avoided anything that might hint at her legal background. Her advantage was catching Thompson off guard. In her bathroom mirror, she practiced her arguments, honing her tone. Polite but firm, knowledgeable without sounding like a lawyer. Thompson expected a flustered teacher, intimidated by the courtroom's weight and jargon. Sarah packed her grandfather's worn leather briefcase with neatly organized evidence. Payment receipts, the citation, procedural guidelines, and relevant case law. Nestled between 2 legal pads was a sealed envelope with backup material she hoped not to need but had ready just in case. The best weapon in court, her grandfather used to say, is being more prepared than anyone expects. As she slipped into bed, Sarah felt a surprising calm. Tomorrow wasn't just about clearing her name from bogus charges. It was about facing down misused power, the exact kind of lesson she wove into her English classes. Win or lose, she'd meet Thompson on her terms. The city courthouse hummed with morning chaos, attorneys shuffling files, clerks calling names, and anxious defendants awaiting their turn. Sarah sat in the back, quietly observing Thompson handle cases before hers. His style was predictable, brusque with defendants, friendly with prosecutors, and quick to shut down explanations. He ruled fast, rarely citing laws. Most unsettling to Sarah was how often he interrupted self-represented litigants mid-argument. She noticed James, the clerk she'd spoken to on the phone, avoiding eye contact with defendants. He seemed uneasy, especially when Thompson handed down harsher-than-expected rulings. Docket 47B, Sarah Johnson, failure to appear and contempt of court, James called. Sarah approached the defendant's table, sensing the room's eyes as she set down her grandfather's briefcase. Thompson barely looked up from her file, his face a practiced mask of disinterest. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his tone thick with condescension, "you're charged with missing a court hearing for traffic violation TR 202345892 and contempt for ignoring a judicial summons. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Sarah said steadily. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding I'd like to clarify." Thompson's brow ticked up slightly. "This seems clear-cut, Ms. Johnson. You were summoned to appear on October 15th for your citation. You didn't, so the court added a contempt charge, which lands us here." "With respect, Your Honor," Sarah replied, "I was never informed of any October 15th hearing. I received a traffic citation on October 1st and paid it online by October 3rd. Here's the payment confirmation." She passed the printed receipt to the clerk, who handed it to Thompson. He glanced at it briefly. "Paying a fine doesn't excuse you from a mandated court appearance, Ms. Johnson." The citation clearly noted a court date was required. "Respectfully, it didn't," Sarah countered, presenting the original citation. "There's no court date on the document, and the online portal confirmed the matter was resolved after payment." A flicker of annoyance crossed Thompson's face. "Ms. Johnson, you may be used to having the final say in your classroom, but in my court, I determine what qualifies as proper notification." His patronizing tone drew glances from several lawyers. "I understand, Your Honor," Sarah said, unfazed. "But due process demands actual notice for a contempt charge. Could the court provide evidence of the notification I allegedly received?" Thompson's jaw tightened subtly. This wasn't the rattled teacher he'd expected. "Mind your tone, Ms. Johnson," he warned. "Challenging this court's procedures only worsens your contempt." Thompson leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. The courtroom fell silent, other attorneys pausing to watch the standoff. "Ms. Johnson, let's be clear," Thompson said, his voice heavy with authority. "Our records confirm you were properly notified. Not receiving it isn't a valid defense." Sarah kept her cool. "Understood, Your Honor. May I see the proof of service for that notification?" Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Mr. James, provide Ms. Johnson the notification record." James rifled through the file before handing over a form. Sarah examined it closely. "Your Honor, this form is dated October 10th, but it lacks a process server's signature or a certified mail receipt. There's no evidence it was ever delivered." A muscle twitched in Thompson's jaw. "Are you suggesting this court fabricated records, Ms. Johnson?" "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply noting that Municipal Court Rule 7.3 requires documented proof of delivery for contempt charges, and this form doesn't meet that requirement." Thompson's face darkened with anger. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Johnson, your amateur legal antics are wearing thin. Your disrespect for authority, like your remarks at last month's town hall, seems to be the real issue here." There it was, the misstep Sarah had been waiting for him to make in open court. She noticed a young journalist in the back jotting notes furiously. "I wasn't aware my free speech at a public forum was relevant to a traffic violation, Your Honor," she replied, her tone courteous but firm. Thompson's face flushed slightly. "Your attitude is the problem. This court finds you in contempt for failing to appear. You're fined $2,000 in order to complete 40 hours of community service." He struck his gavel, expecting to end the matter. "Your Honor," Sarah said evenly, "I'd like to submit a motion." "This case is closed, Ms. Johnson," Thompson barked. "A motion for judicial recusal is always permissible, Your Honor," Sarah pressed. "Under Rule 2.11 of judicial conduct, a judge must step down if their impartiality might reasonably be doubted." The courtroom fell deathly quiet. Thompson stared at Sarah, momentarily caught off guard, realizing she was no typical defendant. "On what basis?" he managed to ask. Sarah opened her briefcase. "I'm prepared to explain, Your Honor." Standing confidently, hands resting lightly on her grandfather's briefcase, Sarah held the room's focus, every gaze fixed on the unassuming teacher challenging one of the county's most formidable figures. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice clear and deliberate, I move for your recusal on 3 grounds. She pulled a meticulously organized folder from her briefcase. First, there's an evident appearance of bias. You just tied these proceedings to my protected speech at the town hall, suggesting this case is retaliatory. Thompson's expression grew stormy. Ms. Johnson, you're treading on dangerous ground. Second, Sarah continued, undeterred, there are significant procedural irregularities indicating this case deviated from standard practices. She presented a printout from the court's database. My citation was marked paid/closed on October 3rd. Yet, on October 9th, after I questioned Your Honor's ruling at the town hall, the status was manually switched to appearance required without any notice to me. Sarah pivoted slightly, ensuring her voice reached the gallery. My public records request shows this is the only traffic citation in the past year to have its status changed after payment. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as the court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard. Furthermore, Sarah pressed on, pulling another document from her briefcase. I've documented 7 cases where individuals who publicly criticized Your Honor later faced unusual contempt charges or procedural penalties. Judge Thompson slammed his gavel. Enough. You're veering into contempt yourself. Which brings me to my 3rd point, Sarah said, her tone polite but resolute. Judicial Canon 2.2 requires a judge's actions to be free from personal, political, financial, or social influences. She produced the sealed envelope she'd prepared. If Your Honor declines to recuse, I'm prepared to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee, including evidence of a pattern of targeting critics with contempt charges, procedural inconsistencies in multiple cases, and statements from 3 other defendants who faced similar retaliation after publicly opposing Your Honor. The courtroom hummed with shocked whispers. Lawyers scribbled rapidly, and the young journalist in the back paused, mouth slightly agape, his pen still. Judge Thompson's face shifted from red to ashen. Ms. Johnson, he said, his voice strained. Where did you pick up all this legal knowledge? Sarah gave a subtle smile. Before teaching English, I graduated summa cum laude from state law school, Your Honor. Though I chose not to practice, I've stayed sharp on legal matters. My grandfather taught me that understanding the law is a citizen's best defense against its abuse. She placed her hands on the table. I request the record reflect my submission of evidence showing procedural errors, a pattern of potential bias, and my formal motion for recusal. If denied, I'm ready to file an immediate appeal under the collateral order doctrine, as affirmed in Hampton v. County Court, which allows interlocutory appeals for recusal denials. Thompson stared at Sarah, slowly realizing his scheme to bully her had backfired spectacularly. The teacher he underestimated had not only seen through his plan but had set a trap he'd walked right into. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Thompson locked eyes with Sarah before calling a 15-minute recess. In his chambers, his earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by barely suppressed agitation. What do you want, Ms. Johnson? He demanded. Justice, Sarah replied calmly. Dismiss these unfounded charges with prejudice. Recuse yourself from any cases involving me or Lincoln High, and I'll provide a list of 7 similar cases that warrant review. Back in court, Thompson spoke curtly. All charges against Ms. Johnson are dismissed with prejudice. I recuse myself from any future matters involving her to avoid any perception of bias. Outside, a journalist rushed over. Ms. Johnson, any thoughts on today's events? Sarah smiled. The justice system works best when everyone, including judges, upholds the rights of all. 2 weeks later, Sarah was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird when Principal Carter and Superintendent Hayes entered. After class, Carter approached her. I owe you an apology, Sarah. I should have supported you from the start. You were in a tough spot, Sarah said graciously. Things have changed, the superintendent added. Judge Thompson is on leave and the school's funding has been restored. That night, Sarah found her grandfather's restored law school photo accompanied by a note from her students. Thank you for showing us standing up for justice matters. Smiling, she ran her fingers over his law books, thinking teaching might just be her way to fight for fairness. If this story struck a chord with you, give it a thumbs up and follow for more inspiring tales of ordinary folks making a difference. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever stood up to someone abusing their power? Where are you reading from? True strength comes from knowledge and the courage to do what's right. Pass this along to someone who could use a boost. See you next time.